Hey everybody, this is Rustin with Metalholic and the Examiner. With me tonight, Richie Wise, noted producer and co-founder of New York's ProtoMetal heroes and trailblazers, Dust. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing terrific, except being a little hoarse. I was at a couple of concerts the other night, and I was actually enjoying them. So, I don't go to too many rock shows these days, but when I do, I still get into it. So I lost a little voice.
So who'd you go check out?
Other than that, I'm feeling perfect. I actually saw Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, my friend owns a theater, and it was a small 1,000-seat theater, and a small venue for a band like that, and it was just actually really terrific. And our seats weren't bad too. There was no one between me and the band, so it was kind of cool.
Can't beat that. So, a lot of great stuff to talk about. Take us back to Louie's Candy Shop in Flatbush, where it all started with you, Mark, and the Kennys.
Louie's was like, there was this street that went to Prospect Park, was called Parkside Avenue. And Parkside Avenue, for some reason, became the center of hangouts, not just for all us long-haired musician types and long-haired hippies, which we weren't. We were long-haired musician crazy people. But it was also like there were hangouts for the leftovers from the 50s, where those guys that, those greasers, if you will. I remember we used to call them hitters. So there was all these factions and people hanging out, and Louie's Candy Store was right there. The fact that you know about Louie's Candy Store is amazing. In fact, Louie's son, Barry, was the very first the very first person in America to have a Marshall amp. And so all of us, another thing about Louie's is because they had all the magazines there, we used to get fresh off the press Melody Maker.
Oh, nice.
So for us, it was like we knew more about what was happening with the British bands. And for me and my friends, the British bands were what our lives were all about. We just became infatuated. Beatles, and then everything after that, Stones, and on to Cream. And I always say Jimi Hendrix, even though we know he's American, but it was a British band, the experience, and the whole vibe of that was England. But all that stuff, The Who, and you could go on and on, that stuff was just key for all of us. We had a band probably starting in about 1967 that I started with some friends, and somewhere in that first year, I think, the name Dust started. How we came up with it, I don't know. It was there one day. It just, you pull it out of the sky. And, the different configurations, different bass players, different, perhaps another guitar, perhaps different lead singers. But eventually, it was just down to myself and the bass player left, and Kenny was playing with my friend who, at the time, another Parkside Avenue guy, a guy named Robert Schwartz. And Robert Schwartz, who unfortunately died probably, I don't even know, maybe 68, 69, a young kid, would have been, if he lived, I think the American Eric Clapton.
Wow.
I think he was the greatest blues guitar player. It was just astounding. I remember back then listening to, Clapton was my God, and I'm going back real early now, and there was a guy, Mike Bloomfield, that was amazing, an American guy who played with Paul Butterfield, and actually played on, Electrified Dylan stuff, but this guy, Robert, was amazing, and Kenny Aronson was playing bass with him. Now, when either he died or whether that group broke up or something, it was just obvious that I had to play with Kenny and Kenny had to play with me. I guess I had like a vibe of being real serious about it. It's all I did 24/7 was music. And there was nothing else really that mattered to me. And so Kenny's in this situation. So it's me, Kenny, our drummer Anthony, maybe a couple of different lead singers, and just different things, but Dust. And we were playing and gigging, and at one point, it was obvious that we needed to get a different drummer, and I still regret throwing out my best friend, Anthony. He's still my best friend 40 years later, lives in Manhattan, but when we saw Mark, when I saw Mark, and I know Kenny was either in a band with him or knew him, and was in a, it's really hard to say, because I asked Mark the other day, do you remember how we met? He mentioned Robert Schwartz, but I don't remember him playing with Robert Schwartz. I remember him seeing him and thinking, man, this guy's like Mitch Mitchell. This guy's amazing. And he was really amazing. I think the best rock drummer that maybe Brooklyn ever produced. And, you know, certainly my buddy Carmine Apathy was a great one, but he wasn't Brooklyn. I think that was more Queens or Long Island, you know?
Right.
So I'm safe with saying that. But eventually, it was the three of us. I think we looked for a lead singer, maybe we looked for a keyboard player, but the three of us were so unbelievably in sync. Nothing had to be said. Nothing had to be talked about. And that's basically what happened when Dust became the three-piece. I would write tunes with my partner Kenny Kerner, who we went on to produce stuff like Kiss and other things after that. But you know, it's sort of a blur, the presentation of me presenting them with riffs or with song ideas, because it was so organic. And the thing that's so important to note was that there was no thought process at all. It was just from the heart, from the soul, just the three of us got together, and whenever we played anything, it came out louder, faster, and just more what became metal than anything. I mean, I think if we played like with the amps turned off, we were louder than everybody. It's just there was an intensity with the three of us playing, and it was obvious that there was just no one that could add to that. We couldn't find anybody that could just take it up from there. Right. So it was just the three of us, and I took on the choice, writing and singing and being the front man. And I had these two unbelievable players. I mean, Kenny Aronson and Mark Bell, prior to Marky Ramone,
right,
pardon me, was just unbelievable. And when we played live, it was just, like I like to say, there was no inhale, it was 100% exhale. It was unreal. But when we finally did record, taking like the Cream model, where their albums had a lot of different styles and a lot of different colors and different types of songs, I figured, hey, we could do that. And because I had a lot of different influences, some of the songs on these two albums aren't as far from metal as possible. You know, there's like a Rolling Stones type thing. There's a Procol Harum type song on Heart Attack. But when you hear the stuff like From a Dry Camel from the first album, the stuff like Suicide and Learning to Die, that was what we were live, and it was just like, it was insane. And it didn't have to be thought about. We never made any decision. This is what we should do. We should do more of this or less of this. We just played, and it came out that way. And we just loved playing together.
And you can hear it on the records and everything. I'm so glad you guys are reissuing this, because I was going to say, and you sort of answered a question I was going to ask, was whether there was a sonic goal in mind or if you just went with whatever came to you. But there was, like you said, there was a lot going on over in England at the time. But over here, we had Blue Cheer out west, but you guys were it on the East Coast. I mean, some people might say Sir Lord Baltimore, but they were more stoner psychedelic rock. You guys were really the power, the metal of it all. And it came out on the album. I mean, the first Dust album was amazing, but Heart Attack really seemed to set the tone for who you were and what might have been. Can you talk a little bit about the memories from making each of those albums and sort of what was going on at the time?
The first album, some interesting memories. We went into a studio. We were on a very pop label, which, looking back, might have really caused any forward momentum or any excitement to dissipate, because it wasn't the right place for us. The first album, Buddha Kama Sutra, the label, actually was part of a corporation that owned a recording studio called Bell Sound. Bell Sound was a legendary recording studio.
Right. They
recorded like a lot of hits there. Some major records, a lot of Four Seasons and Little Anthony, and I mean, some amazing rock and roll, doo-wop, all kinds of stuff. Another thing, one of the staff engineers there was a guy that actually was an Abbey Road engineer, a guy named Malcolm Addy.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was reading Jeff Emmerich's book about his days engineering the Beatles stuff, he mentions Malcolm and one of his guys that he learned from. But so it was an interesting place. It was a recording studio where the engineers, like, it was still corporate, that world, and the maintenance guys wore like white robes. It was like Abbey Road was like that in England, and but it was loosening up, and we went into the studio with an engineer that became a good friend and had a great career for many years in television after that. But the first album happened real quickly. I remember, here's an interesting story. We're in the studio, maybe it's a day or two in, and I look in the control room, and I see this guy there. I didn't even know who it was. And then manager came out, Dominic Cecilia, and said they got Andrew Loog Oldham in the control room. That was the Rolling Stones manager and producer.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I got maybe a little intimidated or what have you, but I don't remember him adding anything to anything, like saying anything or responding to anything, good or bad. So I think he was just there for a few hours, and I don't think I ever saw him again. First album was real organic. I don't think we ever thought about where a mic is or how many mics are on the drums or what it's going to be like. We just played. We always played the tracks live, probably overdubbed some guitar solos, and Kenny spent a little time overdubbing some steel. He played some nice steel because Kenny had this other love, kind of really weird, of country music. so here's this unbelievable rock bass player, but he also liked to go home and play some pedal steel and listen to Buck Owens or whoever was popular back then, And so that was kind of interesting. So he added that flavor to the records, and the first album went really quick. But Dominic got Eddie Kramer to mix it. And that's kind of an interesting sidebar because, man, and he mixed that first album at Electric Lady.
Right.
Because Eddie Kramer was, Jimmy's guy, and Eddie put together Electric Lady Studios. But we weren't allowed to be at the mix. He just played it for us when it was all done.
Oh, but he's phenomenal, It's like, Eddie's doing it, I trust him.
Yeah, so we figured it can't be bad and good. But after that first album, we really played some really good shows, and one of my thrills in life, still to this day. Here I am, a young kid, and we were really young. I mean, I was older than Kenny and Mark by a little bit, but I was still, when we did the first album, about 20 years old. And when we're on 48th Street, Manhattan, all the music stores are there. That's where we'd go to buy our gear. With the first album, I remember we got an advance, and I went out and bought 3 Marshall stacks. Kenny bought acoustic 360 amps. Mark bought this custom-made Ludwig kit with 28-inch bass drum. And, I mean, we had to be, like I said, it was so loud. I mean, even when we played in clubs where I had to buy a 50-watt head so I would tone down. But even when it was off, it was like they used to say, you got to turn it down. We were just loud. This is the intense way that Mark played. Mark was amazingly aggressive, and Kenny was aggressive on the bass, and I guess the only way I could play was where there was massive distortion. And it was before there was able to be preamps and stuff where you could turn it down and still get that sound,
Right.
For me to get my sound, I had to turn that thing up, And I remember we were on 48th Street, and we were at the music stores, and one of the music stores had like the radio station, must have been WNEW, playing outside through a speaker over their front door, and WNEW was playing Dust and From a Dry Camel, and it was just like mind-boggling. Here I am at the music stores, and they're playing my records, and there people are hearing it on 48th Street, and you want to go say, that's me, But really, some cool stuff. But the album came out, and I think it was Dominic who got the skeletons for the cover. And now looking back, thinking at the time we thought that was kind of like, that's crazy. But looking back, it was sort of like brilliant. I don't know if there was ever a darker album cover than the 3 skeletons from the catacombs, wherever they were, from Rome or Italy. Mark said they were from Mexico. Maybe he's right. I don't know.
Yeah, it looks like something you'd see from one of those extreme metal bands now from like over in Europe or whatnot. So it was way ahead of its time. And Kenny, your partner in crime, Kenny Kerner, had said that the first album, it felt like there were a little too many chiefs in the way, and not just the engines, if you will, which you sort of had on Heart Attack, where it was just you guys.
Yeah. Well, in the first album, I don't know if there was any chiefs. There was nobody. It just happened. It just appeared. We would go in. I have very little recollection of recording that album, but I have way more of the second album of Heart Attack, because that was the first time that I really said, okay, now it's in our hands. We're going to do it, and I'm going to figure out maybe a better way of, let's listen to the sounds of the instruments and get them to sound the way we want to sound, Let's make choices. Let's do some colors in there. And that's when I started, I think, thinking like more of a producer. I remember during the second album, really just after sessions, going home and saying, okay, now, should I double that guitar? Should I add maybe an acoustic to go along with that electric part? Pete Townsend was great doubling his electric rhythms with acoustic rhythms. Should we do that? Should I double it and put one on one side, one on the other, or should I put it all on one side and make it thicker? Should we add this color, that color? And so the second album took on a whole different identity, because it was way more ambitious. When on Suicide, there's this great bass solo from Kenny Aronson. It's amazing. And we needed a certain tone, so we looked for the right Marshall to put it through, and he used one of my Marshalls. I remember us trying different heads and different speaker cabinets to get that aggressive, Entwistle / whoever kind of sound. Mm-hmm. But that would have been way over the top. I mean, Entwistle was like not even turned on compared to the sound of that bass solo, which almost sounded like a guitar in many ways. But so there was a lot more effort on the second album to concern ourselves with the way things sounded and the way songs were presented. The first album was way more organic. Nothing wrong with that, because I still think when I listen to like From a Dry Camel, it's just still it's still like, what the hell were we thinking, man? That was just crazy. And that was more like that was our main song live. Right. So we always wanted to, that was like a feature song. But the amazing thing is about being in a band, I mean, if you probably went to the band 3 months, 4 months before we did the first album, we were probably doing maybe only one or two of those songs, and everything else was other stuff. Every 3 months we'd have new songs, because we did a demo before the first album, and I don't know if any songs on that demo made it to the first album, because we were always improving and changing and writing, and I was always writing that new stuff, and then Kenny Aronson had a couple of nice riffs, for like Ivory and stuff like that. So it was some cool stuff, and so it was constantly evolving and playing and getting louder and faster, but yet the albums had all those different colors, because no one told us we couldn't. No one said you should. It just happened,
And both those albums are still so strong now. I mean, obviously, it's got the feel of that time, but I think they're still relevant. Are there, obviously From a Dry Camel, everybody knows from Dust, but are there like one or two songs that still resonate with you maybe more than others, that still stand out for you the most?
Yeah, the one even more than From a Dry Camel, I think Suicide.
Nice.
Was the best one. And another thrill, you're in a band that hasn't existed in many years, and all of a sudden you're on YouTube and you see this other rock band covering Suicide, So that sort of like was, holy shit, somebody else likes it, But Suicide, I think, really does it for me lyrically, and the groove, and Mark's drumming. I mean, the way we put that together, I love the opening guitar riff a lot, and I still think it holds up. That song and Learning to Die, the two that actually ended each side of the record when there were sides on records, and that was how we were live. I mean, those were songs we always played live. And Suicide, still, I think if somebody said to me, if you guys would have done like 8 Suicides, you would have been the biggest band in the world. I don't know if that's true, but I think it made a statement. But we never thought of it in terms of we should do more of this or less of some other stuff. It's just the stuff we played, and it really, like I said, it really came from the heart. not from the mind, you know, from the heart down.
That's the way it should be. And Dust was, and you alluded to this earlier, Dust was sort of held back by the limited vision of Neil Bogart's label at the time, Kama Sutra. Why not go elsewhere and forge on?
I think that the reality was that nothing really moved forward after the second album, which we thought was so much deeper and so much better. The gigs weren't getting any better. In fact, I think they were the same or non-existent. And because of that, my life certainly changed. And, you know, there was no phone call to break up a band. But the fact is, I got married at the end of 72, and I chose to not want to be like part of that whole scene. Believe me, with all my heart and soul, I loved every minute playing and being on stage and gigs, that whole thing. But the whole scene, I like going home. I like being with my wife, and producing was a perfect gig for me because this way I could, you know, be in the studio all day but come home at night, you know, or come home even 2, 3, 4 in the morning, or later than that. But it still was grounded. So just sort of because of that move on my part, sort of just like fizzled out. I never called Mark. Mark never called me. If we were going to proceed, it would have had to been with a different record company, with an agent, and with somebody telling us more stuff than we ever thought about. Like, this is what you should be doing. But you got to understand, everybody always told us we shouldn't be doing what we were doing. You know, most people would have said you can't play this loud. You got to play more melodic, more pop, more this, more that. I mean, we were just playing what we loved. Was hard rock that became metal, if you will. You know, and I still believe to this very day. And I heard Alice Cooper say it on TV that it was his band that Lester Bangs called, and he was a writer at that time, and he started using the term of heavy metal. I believe, though, it was if it was Alice Cooper, then it was Alice Cooper and Dust, because I know for a fact, because Lester told me that, man, he said, you know, he wrote an article and he started calling this kind of music heavy metal. I mean, and he mentioned Dust right in there, maybe in conjunction with a couple of other bands. But I got to say, the first time those words were ever strung together to talk about bands, I'm not talking about Steppenwolf, talking about heavy metal thunder on their record, you know, because no one thought of heavy metal in terms of music at that time. I think the heavy metal thunder he was talking about was a motorcycle or something, you know. But when it came to music, I think Dust was there, and certainly our live show was just pure, unadulterated exhale. It was loud, it was fast, it was the loudest, it was the fastest. And everybody would always told us, you know, don't do that. But looking back, you'd say, man, if we did that and we knew, you know, there was really no thought. We didn't think, we just played.
Everyone in Dust and the quartet, because Kenny Kerner was involved, your partner in crime there, wrote lyrics, production, all that stuff. But Kenny Aronson went on to so many great bands, such a phenomenal player. Mark Bell, as you said, became Marky Ramone, also played with Richard Hell. I mean, great stuff there. You guys all went on to have great careers. You were the one that sort of got out of the music industry first, but it's pretty spectacular, given where it all started, that you all had such success. So I was in it for 30 years. Yes, I got out, but I got out after 30 years. I produced about 70 albums. Well, and that was sort of the next question I was going to ask you, because you and Kenny went on to do production together, the Stories, Badfinger, and of course Kiss, which we'll talk about in a moment. But unlike the other guys, you sort of made a move to get out of the industry. But what were you doing? Because you're sort of the one that's been the most off the radar in terms of what you were up to during that period. Well, I worked for a record company for 15 years, and I produced a ton of stuff for TV and movies and a lot of bands, and I worked for a West Coast label called Scotti Brothers that was distributed by a number of different labels, CBS, Epic, and sort of that. And we had John Cafferty, Beaver Brown, we had Survivor, we had James Brown, we had Weird Al Yankovic, and I produced a lot of stuff. I did a lot of TV work, a lot of movies. I had produced songs in tons of movies and TV shows. I worked on the show Baywatch. I produced Baywatch stuff. I was very
visible in my world,
right?
But I was sort of out of the touring rock metal world for a while. I produced some bands through the years before I started working at the labels, but early on with Kenny, we produced for about a dozen years, and then I spent about 15 years over at Scotty Brothers, and then I had my own production company and worked with a couple of partners, and we worked with Jeff Keith Tesler, and we did an album with his band. And there was a band that we found, and we signed to Hollywood Records, a band they were called the Goodyear Pimps, and they were amazing rap metal kind of thing, Rage Against the Machine type stuff. And they were amazing, and I wish they got famous because I was real proud of that project. But off the radar, not for me, and the ability to say that I worked on a lot of great records and had the fortunateness, there's a word I just made up, to go all over the world and make records in Europe and Japan, and and I spent a lot of time in the studio, thousands and millions of hours. I just finished watching the Sound City, the thing that Dave Grohl put together at the studio, Sound City. I must have recorded 1,000 hours at Sound City, different bands, and so I had a lot of fun, man, and had a lot of music in my life. And when I turned 50, I like to say that the roller coaster threw me off, and I jumped at the same time. I had enough. Music was changing. The formats were changing. Digital was coming in. Rap was real big. And I just, the passion that I lived with every moment of my life was just bled out of me. But I left some stuff behind that was pretty good.
You did. You made a mark on my life, whether you knew it or not. So,
yeah.
And getting to that, because the first band that I truly discovered that brought me into the full love of hard rock and music was Kiss. Of course, I bought the first album on my 10th birthday, and Kenny Kerner got the demo from Bogart, obviously. What was your first thought, though? Your first take on the band when he brought that to you?
I came from a little different perspective. By that time in my life, I was really into this British progressive rock scene. Mm-hmm. I really loved Yes, who I just saw, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and things of that nature. Stuff that was more adventurous, arrangements, crazy stuff. A lot of people I know hate that stuff, but I loved that overindulgence, and stuff like Jethro Tull. So when I first heard Kiss, I thought it was a send back to a simpler kind of vision. I thought they did it incredibly well, and I thought the songs were real catchy, Cold Gin and Strutter, and things of that nature. I thought these are really great songs, and the band really sounded like they had a vision. But little did I know that when I finally met them and started working with them, and I'll love to go on record to say, this was the most focused, the most absolute, put blinders on, one-dimensional, we are going to be the biggest, this is what we're going to do. All the thought process that Dust didn't have, Kiss had it. Kiss were so amazing in their complete just view of who they were, what they wanted to be, where they were going. And I learned a lot from that. They were set, and there was no denying that they had a vision for what they were doing. The songs, everything just had to fit into their vision. When we were in the studio doing the first album, all of them would be drawing pictures of what they wanted boots to look like and costumes to look like. They had, as you see on the first album, a very primitive makeup vision,
right.
That became crazier, but they were into it. The whole thing was just focused beyond belief. And it's that kind of focus that I just finished reading Springsteen's biography, and we could jump from one genre to the other, but I got to tell you, there's not a lot of difference. It's focus. It's thinking exactly what you want to do and who you want to do it with. Springsteen certainly thought that out and created his thing, and Kiss, in a different genre, did their thing. And first album was a pleasure. Working with them, working on arrangements, working on getting some great vocals out of them, and loved it. Paul, my thought on Paul, never cared about being Clapton. Wanted to be the best rhythm guitarist in the world. You know what I mean?
Right.
He wanted to be Pete Townsend. He used to say that to me. You know, I love Pete Townsend. I want to be this most solid rhythm player. He was. Gene was really focused. I mean, he had a vision in his brain. You know, he had it completely where what he wanted to do. And then that was just admirable, unbelievable. Loved it. And Ace and Peter, easy to work with, good players, and a lot of fun. And the first album was a pleasure to do.
It was your idea on the first album to bring Bruce Foster in for the piano on Nothing to Lose, right?
Yeah.
That was a little bit of a twist for Kiss, even on the first album. How did, because Paul and Gene were really the driving forces, they still are. What was their thought when you first said, hey, we should do this?
They were open, no question. We were working together. They never saw that as something that was out of, I think they might have probably said, let's try it. Let's give it a whirl. They didn't fight it at all. And Bruce was a guy who had played some of on my Gladys Knight stuff. I mean, you talk about producers that can, in the K section, to have Gladys Knight and Kiss. I don't know if there's anybody out there that has that wide range that were both successful. So it's like, wow. You know, I've looked back, how does that happen? You know what? I go into a studio, and there's one thing I prided myself on, and back then we had tape, you know, and the tape had nothing on it. You would unpack it from the box, you put it on the machine, and it was empty. And I used to love filling it up with stuff, you know? And it was just like, I never had a problem coming up with ideas and things to, let's try this, let's try that, you know? And sometimes it worked through the years, sometimes it didn't. But man, did I love being in the studio and making music. And producing allowed me to work with, through the years, you know, a lot of players that were some of the greatest players in the world, and some of the great drummers and bass players and guitar players and studio guys that play anything, and, you know, just a lot of fun. I mean, a guy like Vinny Colaiuta, one of the great drummers in the world, I mean, working with him and you know, his chops were so amazing, and he had this jazz, this whole fusion, this whole thing. I went on to play with Sting and Jeff Beck, and, I mean, one of the legends. But we got together and talked, and he said, man, I gave him like a rock thing to play on, and he said, I love it, because he says, my idol was John Bonham. So you'd be surprised, right? A lot of these exactly. So there's really not, you have to understand, there's really not a big difference between a lot of these genres, a lot of these styles that are completely different. They're really not, because the breathing of music, the inhale, the exhale, the beats, the swing, we used to call it swing in the studio. You know, when a track swings, nothing swings better than listening to Zeppelin do Kashmir. Because when I say swing, I mean the air, the pulse, the in between the notes. Right. You know what I mean? The way rock drummers can lay back that beat, you know, lay back that snare drum, just a hair, and just give you that, oh man. It just still does it for me. And, you know, so Bruce brought Bruce Foster in, might have tried something else. The second Kiss album was, I don't like to think about it too much. There was a lot of, that was a lot of stuff that went on for that album that was just not, was not right. Different studios, different ideas, different things. It was just a mishmash, and it didn't have the focus. Should I take some blame? Absolutely, I'll take some blame for that. But the fact that everything that contributed to them being able to then go on and have that career, you have to say, hey, sometimes you learn more from a mistake than you do from a success.
All right. Well, you guys switched coasts on that album. They weren't familiar with being out there. There's a lot of other stuff going on, you know. So I'll ask you this last question. As Kenny told it, there was a major label offer to pull Kiss from Bogart and Casablanca. That didn't happen, and Bogart himself produced the third album. What happened between Hotter Than Hell and what would have been the third album you guys did for them?
As I remember it, I believe we had opportunities to produce some other bands for some other labels, major labels that we felt were areas we sort of wanted to get away from that Neil Bogart pop identity.
Right.
And even though obviously he took us to astronomical places, we had the ability to. Kenny and I, we were doing something with I believe with Arista or Warner's or something, some other labels, and we thought it was a good move to make. So we made some choices to do some other things at that time, and just to move away, not so much from Kiss at all, but just move away from that label identity.
Right.
And I think that happened there. And rather than looking for a producer, they went in themselves, Kiss with Neil, and of course the timing was right because Kiss wrote this song that obviously is their anthem to this very day, I Want to Rock and Roll All Night. And so that worked out great for them. But then they went on to work with one of people that I think was great, Bob Ezrin.
Bob Ezrin, yeah.
and Ezrin to me was always one of the greatest producers. And loved Ezrin and loved his work. I mean, The Wall can't be beat, you know.
Right. He did a lot of great albums, but you guys made a lot of great albums too, including for me, obviously, the very first Kiss album, which to me is still a seminal hard rock record, along with so many others. I've stolen you for so long. Richie Weiss of Dust and so many other things. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts and memories with me and with us, the listeners, and everything. The albums Dust and Heart Attack being re-released, do we have the date on when they're actually being dropped, the reissues?
April something. They're doing it vinyl as well. I think the vinyl, and then there's the CD with both albums on the CD. And it's you have to ask. I have like my email trail is like it's like going around the block 20 times. So it's sometime in April. Real excited about that. And thank you, Rustin. It's a pleasure, man.
Oh, absolutely. I could sit here and talk music with you for hours, but thank you so much. The Dust albums, I'm so glad they've been remastered, coming back out again. Look forward to getting those. You got to get the vinyl though, man, because without the vinyl, it's like that's what really takes you back, you know.
Man, I had records that for years I listened to with skips. Remember, records used to skip.
Yep.
And I mean, I'll tell you, NSU by Cream on Cream's first album, it had a skip in the beginning guitar intro. And that's how I listened to it for years until I got a CD of it when they invented CDs. But that was the beauty of it, man, you know? It was like, wow, you know, you live it. Vinyl was great. Vinyl still sounds great if you have a
Absolutely.
turntable.
Richie, again, thank you so much for taking the time. I'll let you get back to it. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again and share some more memories one day. But if not, I appreciate the honor.
All right. Thank you so much, Rustin. And good luck to everybody out there, okay?